Hi, everyone. We will start our discussion about unleashing the power of generative AI by looking a little bit to the back. We've seen that over the past few years, there's been a massive expansion in the field of generative AI. And if at the beginning, the release of new model or the new model version, that was something quite rare, then now it's no longer the case. We see it in the news so often, and there are so many things happening in the field. So let's start by looking at the use cases where you've seen the most impact made by generative AI. So maybe let's start with Tiago.
Thank you. Yeah, so we're working in Japan with large Japanese companies that are integrating AI into their businesses, and we definitely see differences in adoption. And I would say that the more digital a function is, the faster the adoption, of course, since it's easier to plug in data sets and connect them to models and immediately see returns on that investment. And in addition to that, it's easier to iterate. By contrast, the use cases there are more physical in nature, so things like manufacturing or environmental management, which is something we also want to focus on. That's where we feel like there's longer-term potential impact, but for now, it's going to take longer for us to integrate the models to set up that data collection and get the flywheel going.
Thank you, Tiago. Chandra?
We are building foundation models for multilingual, multimodal foundation models. The idea is to build sovereign models. And along with that, we're building AI cloud. That AI cloud will actually serve foundation models that we build, and also general purpose open source models as well. The idea is that to enable the largest democracy, largest number of developers and consumers, which is India. So we are trying to build that ecosystem. I think AI is that phenomena, especially now as after ChatGPT and the way things have been happening. We have to build multiple such ecosystems to represent global nuances. And that's what we are focused on right now.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. And maybe over to you, Mohan. Can you share about the use cases and maybe transition into the industries where you see the most impact?
No, sounds good. Maybe I should start from the beginning. Bain's actually had the privilege of being associated with this space over the last about 2 years. We were early entrants into the space before ChatGPT was a thing. Consequently, we've done a lot of work in trying to get production-grade systems out for multiple clients. I mean, today we have close to about 200 odd clients for whom we built these systems. So I'll take this in two parts. One is, like you said, the industries. I think the three industries where we are seeing the maximum impact, one is financial services, clearly. The second is in healthcare. And the third is in education, increasingly, as industries. And from another perspective, if you look at it in terms of use cases, I'd sort of put it into a couple of buckets. The first bucket is one where we are seeing back-end processes, back-office processes where the knowledge tasks in play. In general, we are seeing that as a huge area of focus with anywhere between about an 18 to 20 to 22% kind of an improvement that people are able to drop into their processes in the short to medium term. There is then a lot of work that we are doing in enabling front-end commercial excellence. So where you have B2B selling or where you have, let's say, a wealth management as a practice, we are able to see close to about a 40–50% improvement in productivity that we are able to see in some of those use cases. The third big area is in hyper-personalization. So essentially to look at, for example, creating marketing content or to look at specifically things that you can build, taking things to the segment of one that you can actually build things for. So for a direct-to-consumer version of any industry, we think that's something that helps. There are further buckets which are more strategic, where we are, for example, seeing people come and fundamentally reinvent their business. But I think those are fewer and further apart. The predominant use cases will be in these three buckets and across these three industries that I called out.
Yeah, I think this is where we've also seen the generative AI making the biggest impact. And some of these things, they were not really possible or they were very hard to achieve beforehand. So, Tiago, maybe can you share how things look from the industry perspective in Japan?
Actually, I would say that in terms of adoption, I don't think about it so much per industry, but I think about it as a per use case, right? So in every industry, there's multiple business functions, and some of those are more amenable to generative AI adoption than others. So for example, even in manufacturing industry, when it comes to customer success, when it comes to knowledge management, those are functions that can easily adopt generative AI because all industries have problems with too much documentation, slow R&D. Everyone wants to accelerate their R&D cycles and their customer support cycles and their invoicing and so on. So I think that every industry has some functions that need to be identified and can immediately benefit from the adoption of generative AI. But at the end of the day, our mission is to enable AI for positive impact. And I think long-term, the adoption of generative AI for that physical side, the manufacturing side, the environmental management side, and as was mentioned with the healthcare side, is going to have the wider economic benefits that I think is going to be really transformative.
Yeah. I think that's a very important point that we have something similar. Even if you look across the different industry pillars, there will be different departments, but the challenges could be like overlapping even across the industries. Chandra, what's your experience in that?
So I think there will be a lot of challenges as we build these models. We are still day zero. I will not even call it day one. I think the biggest challenge as we build these use cases, which Mohan and Tiago talked about, I think the biggest challenge will be electricity and compute. In fact, electricity is a bigger challenge than the power is a bigger challenge than the compute itself. I think Mark Zuckerberg also mentioned that in one of his podcasts, that as we build these models, especially as we scale for different use cases, and the way there are multiple dimensions, progress is happening exponentially. Models are getting bigger, better, scaling laws are working, and across many use cases are merging, right? And then there is, with those use cases, we are enabling, enterprises are enabling them for various use cases, consumer or B2B use cases, right? Now, as these things are happening, and of course, everyone, and there's this open source, which is also pushing the boundaries. So there is technology advancements, there is use case advancements, and then there's consumption. So, it's like all of the three moving at rapid pace. Now with that, to serve that kind of use cases, you need to build an infrastructure which is highly scalable to serve the inference use cases. And also, along with that, when we train this, you need to train the systems which are faster or even better. So with that, chips are getting better. Not everyone has access to chips or the compute. Let's assume we let bigger players do that. Then the question is, for them, when they scale it for billions of users, how are they going to find the power, right? So that is a challenge which is happening. I mean, that's the more technical challenge. Everything else, I think, will be figured out. Use cases, languages, sovereign, all those things are part of the play anyway. But question is, as we build the systems, how to identify the right compute and power. That's the biggest challenge, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think the question of getting compute and like how much power it's using, how much water it's using, is a very important one. But before we dive into sustainability, let's look at the question which potentially like a lot of organizations and startups are facing. So when and if they should consider building their own language model, or they should just straightforward go ahead and use the large language models which are available in the market, potentially do some fine-tuning. So what's your take on that?
I think in terms of building the models, I think it's an extremely expensive job. Companies should be, or especially developers and enterprises, they should be wary of. They should think twice whether they want to build it or not, especially if you are pre-training or building the foundational model. Because the way technology is moving so fast, models are getting better. You just want to make sure that that the use case you're targeting, is that a use case which others will not target? Then sure, in that case, you should build. Or companies or sovereigns, for example, Japan, or let's say Africa, if they want to build, then they should build because there is a clear market for that to justify the cost and also to make these models better in those use cases, right? So, but if you're not that, then I think fine-tuning is the way to go. There are foundational models which are reasonable. You can fine-tune them now. You can leverage state-of-the-art models, let's say GPT-4 or let's say in our case Krithrim, or you can fine-tune open source models, right? That is something which is that is something you have to evaluate, do some benchmarking, create your own test set, see what suits your use case, and then go with that kind of model fine-tuning. But I think the first choice should be fine-tuning. If your use case can be done with that, that's a good approach. However, if there is a big use case with which you will be able to defend your moat, either your data, either your use cases, then maybe consider doing training.
Thank you, Chandra. What do you think, Tiago?
Yeah, absolutely agree with Chandra. This is a very expensive endeavor. And I always like to make this analogy of, let's say you're some department and you want to implement a system to transform your workflow, build a new digital workflow for your company, right? And you need a database. You need an operating system to run that on. You're not considering, should I create my own operating system, right? So what you're going to do is you're going to strategically pick what is the right operating system, what is the right database platform. And as LLMs become more and more part of this digital infrastructure, we're going to move to that same decision matrix where there are considerations that need to be made. So precisely with these API models, do I want to send my data to a third party? Do I not? Am I willing to take a compromise? Maybe if open source is not quite as good, but I can keep everything within my system. Those are all questions that need to be assessed and depends on the use case. There's no right answer for anyone. But at the end of the day, it's like which LLM technology am I going to use versus developing it in-house, similar to databases and operating systems. So that's how we like to educate our clients.
Yeah. What do you think, Mohan?
I mean, I think it's a variant of what both of them said. I'd start from the beginning, completely agree on the cost. It's prohibitive to actually go and build your own model. More importantly, I think data challenges are starting to become big. I think for the initial people who put these models together, it happened in a period when data privacy regulation was not as clear. As things are becoming a little clearer, that's becoming a bit of a challenge. So if you take a step back for most organizations that are getting into this space, I think the filter that they would have to apply is whether they need another model for a use case or an existing model will work. So that's, I think, the first thing to look at. I think the second thing to look at is, are there some very specific data privacy, data residency regulation that they need to work around, which makes them having to look for another alternative a little more viable. And I think the third thing is fundamentally to look at it in terms of maybe specific challenges like economics. Chandra spoke when we were, before we came to the stage on things like, for instance, economic models. When you take large countries, the cost of using some of these might tend to become prohibitive over a period of time. So if you see some very specific reasons, you would try and get to the place where you are building something that might be specific. What are we seeing as initiatives? I mean, for most enterprises, existing models are good. We are seeing some industry-level initiatives where multiple players within an industry, for example, telcos are coming together to create, let's say, a telco-specific model, largely because they have deep pockets and they have the data to do it. Then we are seeing sovereign initiatives where government-sponsored initiatives are coming in, which are more driven by perhaps geopolitical reasons of making sure that they have access within a particular geography. But I would almost argue that for most people, most enterprises that are getting into this, one of the standard models will work as well. I think the bigger thing to make sure that you are focusing on is ensuring that you are perhaps building an enterprise application that's becoming a little more LLM agnostic over a period of time. So if you have the ability to use multiple LLMs, swapping an LLM in or out becomes easier. And that might be the bigger thing for enterprises to focus on in the immediate term.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, because to be able to use one LLM and maybe do something with another one, and to have this flexibility to move from one to another, right now there is a long way to go for it, for sure.
That's some way to go.
Yeah, and I think what you said about like LLMs or language models which will be specialized for each industry, it sounds very reasonable, because there's definitely a domain knowledge which you can capture, and that would make them way more powerful than some of the foundation models which we can use. Yeah, and of course the data question was always there, and I think even in the future it will be there, right? So we briefly touched on the what does it take to train a model, right, in terms of the compute and in terms of the energy. So how does it, what changes does generative AI bring to the sustainability, right? And both from the, if we can discuss like from both angles of like, okay, making an impact in sustainability, and also the applications which can actually promote sustainability and more sustainable practices. Maybe let's start with Tiago.
Yeah, just to give some context for the audience, so Recursive is grounded on this principle that AI actually is the driving factor for sustainability in the coming decades, and that's actually the whole reason why we started it. So we do believe that AI is going to be that enabler, and it's going to drive that innovation that's going to allow us to solve our major sustainability problems. And so while there's going to be some short-term hurdles, namely with power consumption and our reliance on fossil fuel, we believe that over the long term, that's going to be far outweighed by those applications in the real world, right? So when we transform healthcare, when we transform renewable energy, when we transform all of these fields to make them more efficient, more productive, we can actually start to solve those problems. So for example, at Recursive, we're already using AI to build simulations of the weather that can help us plan renewable energy farms better and improve the ROI on them to accelerate that adoption. So all of these things are interlocked, and it's very difficult to say, well, short term there's this problem, so it's going to be bad long term. In my mind, it's more of a speed bump. So there's a challenge that we need to get across with the large-scale data centers, and there's many people working on these difficult problems, and hopefully we'll get solutions for those. But the transformation of the economy that we see when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to energy production, manufacturing, and logistics are really going to be transformational. And I'm always inspired by that vision of, a few years ago we had this boom with the iPhone apps and the SaaS and so on, and people were asking, where's my flying cars? And I really believe that AI is what's going to unlock that new wave of scientific discovery that is hopefully going to give us that future that we're really going for.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Tiago. Chandra, what do you think? You should have a lot of information on this.
Well, I mean, Tiago made a great point on, the scientific discoveries, and we are focusing on that. It's very close to us as we are manufacturing a lot of the work. So I think, our other parts of businesses, but main thing is that I think that a lot of these models will be, with this generative AI, with the kind of foundation models we have, we will be able to achieve or address applications which have been parked for many years or many decades. Some of them are power, right? Scientific discoveries. Many problems, for example, math, right? There were some unsolved problems for almost 100 years, 200 years. Now we are able to solve some of those with this, and DeepMind. If you can look, we should actually look at DeepMind's work, both in the medicine, coming up with newer drugs. Even one of these challenges was, as there are more and more antibacterial, antibacterial measurements. There are some drugs which were not able to, we were getting saturation. Now with these foundational models, we are able to innovate, and then we are able to identify or generate newer chemicals, newer chemistry with which we are able to address some challenges which were not able to do it. And I think the main reason why that is happening with these foundational models is that they are global, they can consume all of information, let's say the entire science, the biology, chemistry, and users as we get the data, how these different chemicals react to different users. So with that kind of information, these models are able to come up with something which was not humanly possible before. So I think the biggest thing which these models are making from sustainable point of view or from a use case point of view is being able to comprehend at the scale which a single human or a lab is not able to. That's one. Another angle to sustainability which you are referring to was, I think, again, with these models, we'll be able to capture scenarios like biases. There is bias, there is language nuances. Previously, if you look at the internet, most of the information is in the form of, let's say, English, predominantly. Now, with as these AI models become more and more rich, and if we train them well, they would be able to address use cases or applications in their own language, native language. And there's a lot of knowledge and information available in native languages as well. So I think these kind of use cases will also be potentially, if we do it well together as a community, that will also come into picture.
Thank you, Chandra. Mohan, what is your point of view?
I'll add a couple of things to this, and maybe it's appropriate to talk about this at 3 layers. Right? The first level or the first layer is to talk about this in terms of the models and the efficiency of the models and data centers and so on. One part of the reality is, in general, there is a trend towards trying to see if we can get smaller models in play, which maybe consume lesser power. Data centers are starting to get more efficient, and there is certainly a big focus among players to try and see if we can get that to happen. So that's at a foundational level. I think there's a second part to this puzzle, which is the second layer, as I would call it, which is, are there big problems that we can direct the energy of these systems to fundamentally solve, similar to what Chandra talked about. What do LLMs give us? They give us the ability to be able to replicate, let's say, pseudo-reasoning at a level and at a scale that we were not able to apply earlier. So instead of putting one person at a problem or a limited number of people at a problem, what if we were able to put 1 billion people, which are virtual, at a problem and try and see if we could solve them? And I think that we will start seeing this happening in multiple industries, across pharma, across energy, across different sectors. There are some problems, obviously, just this scaling is not going to solve. There are some fundamental problems that will need to get solved. But many of these that can be solved by scaling, I would sort of put in that second category. There's a third piece, which is what this technology makes available. So for example, one of the big things that we are seeing play out is this technology makes things more accessible. We're working, for instance, with the Singapore government to try and see if we can actually create net zero plans for SMEs. And one of the big problems in the past was making expertise available at scale. However, what we can now do is actually create a system that can automate perhaps 80% of the interaction. And as a consequence, it can make things available at a much lower price than was possible in the past. So I think this applied area is also something that needs to be looked at. So I actually think that there is value at all three levels. I mean, the first is maybe foundational and a fewer number of people impacting it. The second is, again, something that will be a focused set of problems. The third one is possibly the scaled problem or the scaled set of problems that we can address. One last thing worth mentioning is one of the big advantages of LLMs is it makes human-like interaction possible. So as a consequence, if there is something that you can do to layer it on top of an application that makes it more accessible to people, that's another version of inclusion that we should be thinking about very actively. So I actually think the biggest impact perhaps is on that third big layer, but the first and the second are important places to look at as well.
Yeah, definitely. It looks like we need to invest our resources in different forms to actually build these models. But what the benefits could be, like they will be really significant, and they can be making an impact of like first companies, like big and small, and then like everyday life of people. So it's definitely worth investing in that. Right. So we are moving to the question about like, what is the difference and what does it take to move the systems from with generative AI, of course, from POC to production? Because this is a totally different game and the challenges are very different. So maybe let's start with you, Mohan.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the earlier panel said it as well, and I'll repeat it for emphasis. Most organizations, if you were to ask them, will talk about the fact that they are prioritizing Gen AI initiatives right now. But what they mean by Gen AI initiatives is maybe a couple of bright teams using the tech on the side of their desk. So POCs that are in play rather than anything else. What does it take to move it from this production, POC space to production? A couple of things. I'd start from the strategic intent. Is there a way in which you actually want to look at specific places that you want to apply the tech in? One of the problems or one of the advantages of the tech is that you can pervasively use it. You can use it to create a chatbot as much as you can use it to create a specific application, as perhaps you can use it for applied research or preventive maintenance. Now, given this variety of use cases, for an organization to take a clear strategic view on where they want to apply it is going to be the first step. And often what we found is these proof of concepts are not necessarily directed at the best source of value for the organization.
Yeah.
So I'd start from there. I think there's a second step, which is to make sure that you're not trivializing the change management that comes at the end of the build. I mean, my experience, for instance, in about 8 or 9 of the clients that we've actually worked with to take these builds to production, is the build cycle is smaller than the change management cycle. So actually to work with the people, to get them adjusted to the tech, to be able to deliver value from it is actually a big challenge. And it's important to focus some time and energy there. So I'd say that's the second big thing to think about on what you want to do once it's in your system and how you want to productionize it. I think there's a third part which is build and scaling related on how you want to use this. I mean, there are very specific challenges like, for example, how do you make sure what works in a proof of concept environment is evaluated and ready for production? When you run it on a million different scenarios, are you going to get some hallucinations? Are you going to make sure that you have the right kind of models of evaluation and the right quality of prompt engineering that gives you what you exactly need, that repeatably gives you something resembling the same answer when you, run it again and again? I think that's turning out to be one of the bigger areas to focus on. There are other challenges like, for instance, cost. I mean, when you put this into production, you are going to start, let's say, seeing, say, if you have a consumer-facing application, you're going to start seeing consumers use it. A lot of this will likely lead to a big spike in your cost because you're now setting your cost up as a variable operating cost model. Is there a way in which you can start thinking about, token optimization? Things like, strategies to cache data to make sure, for instance, that you're not repeating inquiries where you don't need to, that are practically giving you the right kind of scale as you get to production. So what we've realized when we've actually taken builds to production is there's a set of build challenges that we need to go through and we need to solve for. But I wouldn't trivialize the change management, or I wouldn't trivialize the strategic import of what you need to be focusing on as you get there. So I think all three pieces are important. The build, perhaps, is one of the things that organizations will have to face into in the short to medium term to get things moving.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing this. Yeah, I think organizations, like when they start approaching the POCs, they have to be considering like how the path to production would look like. And some of the things like which you not necessarily will be doing for your POC, they will be mandatory, like when you launch into production. Like, Tiago, what's your take on this?
Yeah, so the major challenge we've seen with companies that we're working with has been the data management side. So they're usually not prepared to actually digitalize their data in a way that's suitable for generative AI adoption. And so a lot of the challenges there are around making sure we ingest the data, we pre-process it, and then also getting that business domain knowledge is very critical, right? So we usually see bifurcation between the ML experts and the domain experts, right? And a lot of the times we've seen unsuccessful adoption of AI has been when ML experts have kind of barreled in and we know best, we're going to do some AI solution, and at the end of the day it doesn't get adopted. And that's because we haven't integrated successfully into the business domain. We haven't considered the end users. We haven't really understood what actually needs to be done. And oftentimes we tend to, in the rush for finding the scale, right? We want to have a product that scales, that's repeatable across industries, but oftentimes that product is just going to fail several times because we really need to understand different use cases. And that's where I see actually the value of startups, because startups can niche down and tailor offerings for specific verticals, specific user needs. And we're going to start, in my opinion, seeing more and more of that, because it's very difficult for companies, large companies that are domain experts, to train their own ML engineers, or vice versa for ML engineers to become domain experts unless they really decide to focus on a particular industry. And so I think that's going to be the biggest challenge in the next few years, is how we're going to bring that domain knowledge in to the enterprises. And then, of course, as Mohan mentioned, there's a lot of other more technical challenges when it comes to cost optimization, scaling, and again, as we mentioned before, the whole data ownership question that really needs to be considered. In POC stage, it's fine, you just want to get a cool demo, but when it comes to scale, do I really want my data to go to some other provider, even though they're saying they're not training on it? But there's always a question of cybersecurity. So that's, of course, a technical issue that must be dealt with. But at the end of the day, for that adoption, for that economic transformation that generative AI can really bring, we really need to integrate with the domain experts of each industry, and I think that's going to be key.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Tiago. I think very important point was also about having the technical talent. And like, does every enterprise and every organization, do they have to invest in building your own teams, like who can build this sort of solutions, or they can leverage the solutions, for example, offered by the startups, right? So Chandra, over to you.
I think POCs are just vision. Haven't built, as an engineer or scientist, haven't built the systems. There are many challenges. If you go to the last 20%, 30%, I mean, getting first 70%, great. But the last 20, 30% is the most of the where hard work goes there, right? I can give many examples. One example is that, when you build the system, let's say, the meaning of these words change. If I say word blue, blue can mean sky, it can mean blue whale, it could mean pill, it could mean emotion, bunch of stuff, right? So based on the context of language as well. I mean, there are, as you build multilingual foundational models, point is that each word can mean different in different languages. Not only in the same language, but multiple languages. So as you build the system, how to make this model contextually aware, it's a challenge as you build it, right? So POCs do not address that. POCs only give you, hey, what's possible. The last 20, 30%, the last mile is where you have to put a lot of the efforts, and that's why you need domain experts, as Tiago was referring to. You need to get the experts, you need to get the people who understand the domain, and maybe for that particular use case compared to others. Then, that's one. And people have been talking about AGI for the last 2 days. I mean, I think it's quite far away. A lot of things are yet to be done. I mean, if you, GPT-4 or these foundation models, they can do really well, let's say in problem solving, etc. But if you go take that problem to a remote village in India or let's say in Africa, it will break. It will not be able to do anything. So, you have kids who want to study and they are very good at it and they're bright at it and they're trying to use this AI to, or can use AI. But what is being trained does not work in their language. It doesn't. So even though if you think, hey, we are very close, we're far away, there are challenges. I mean, we only think these POCs address maybe the top 20, 30% of the use cases, which can be worked very well or which works very well, or maybe the 20, 30% population. But when you go expand, it's a plethora of challenges that you get into, and that is where a lot of work is needed. And again, adding to both of them, I think we need to bring in experts, or we need to bring in the consumers who use this and get the feedback quickly and then done, right? That's my thought on POCs versus actually building a real system. I think we are very far away.
Yeah, but I would say like having this feedback loop, especially for these new systems which we are building, it's a really important, and this is where we can get valuable insights of how can you make your system and production even better and better over time. Yeah, and I think let's touch a little bit on the responsible AI and how we can actually make sure that the systems which are used in the generative AI are built in line with responsible AI principles such as inclusiveness, responsibility, transparency, security, privacy, and many more. Maybe let's start with Mohan.
Yeah, I think it's a large topic and one that we could spend another 40 minutes on. I'm not sure we have that amount of time. So maybe a couple of headline messages from our side, my side. I think the key thing is to ensure that you have a comprehensive framework around it. Start from the fact that you look at this as an overall area that needs to be managed. So this requires, for example, organizational clarity on who does what are your approval processes, what are the means by which you are actually looking at the augmented risks or the net new risks that are coming into the organization as a consequence of use of some of the tech. It requires a comprehensive review of, for instance, areas like model biases, data biases that are likely to get introduced. Additional areas of consideration, like, for instance, where you might start seeing things like copyright risks, etc., play out. So I think I'd start with the organizational structure and what you need to solve there. I'd look at various means by which you need to look at tools and tooling that you need to put in place to handle the various kinds of risks that are in play. A comprehensive organizational view on how you handle the net new risks and the augmented risks. And to make sure that there is visibility as well as a process of signing these off within the organization as you are getting into the new world. The reality is that this tech is on us. Yeah. I mean, there is no walking away from it. I was in a panel a couple of days back when someone said something which I thought was great. It said that most organizations are in POC, but the people who are using it for nefarious purposes, either fraud or social engineering, are in production. So we'll have to think about also what's the best way you protect the organization in that sense. So maybe it's a spectrum of all of those that you need to think about as you're taking this ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mohan. Tiago?
Yeah, I have a bit of a contrarian view on this. I believe that this pursuit of explainability as the answer to responsible AI development is not really the answer. So there's no one solution fits all. So as Mohan said, it's a very broad topic, and each use case will have its own issues, its own difficulties, its own technical challenges, and it's all, in my mind, it's all about involving users and doing gradual rollouts, right? So I always like to make parallels with the airline industry, right? So we didn't start flying only when we had a perfect airplane, right? We did have, unfortunately, some airplane crashes, but every time there is this culture of learning. There is the culture of, okay, something went wrong, let's do an investigation, let's work out the causes, let's not blame the people that were participated in that, right? But because that's not going to solve anything, right? What we're going to do is we're going to figure out everything that went wrong, and we're going to put in place measures to prevent that from ever happening again. And so I believe that when we're talking about this, doing small-scale rollouts, doing A/B testing, interacting with users, making sure that when something goes wrong, we accurately log it, and we debug it, investigating. It is a lot of effort, but I think in the long run, it will pay off.
Yeah, thank you, Tiago. Chandra?
I think there are 3 layers in this. One is enterprise and guardrails. You want to make sure that model don't hallucinate, they don't generate something outside which it is not supposed to. That's fast. And majority of the efforts actually are going in this. Yeah. The other 2 are not as much, but the other 2 areas are, I think people, and this will take the longest. The second one is data. Who owns the data? I think people should own the data, or there are nuances around. Are these models representative of the people who are generating the data, right? So if I'm generating data, what is my contribution to it, and can I benefit from it, right? Once these data go into model, there is some other enterprise which is making money out of it, right? So that's that angle that has to be figured out. Knowledge workers or people who are providing the data, I mean, that has to go as and we have not, as an industry, doing good in that. We have to work in that. The third area is applications. We have to identify what kind of application we want to build. The Gen AI, the models can be used for healthcare, education, making the world a better place, but it can also be misused, right? Yeah. For various use cases which we don't want. So that's where the policy come into picture. We have to build an ecosystem with government and sovereign and everyone to make sure that we protect, or we make sure that these models are safe enough, or when we're building the application, we vouch out for those. So these are the 3 areas which I think we have to think from sustainability point of view, accounting for all the stakeholders which are involved, and not just 1 or 2 people sitting everywhere, or some organization sitting and deciding for everyone.
Yeah, definitely. So we do need help from regulators in bringing certain standards, and then we need to have responsibility also at the organization who are building the products, and be it the applications which users will be using, or be it the models which will be used in these applications. And I think to close this session, let's make a little bit of a prediction for future, and maybe if you can share like 1 or 2 sentences on what we should expect in the next few years in the field of generative AI, maybe from the models or from the adoption perspective. That would be great. So let's start with Mohan.
I'll possibly stay in the sort of practical zone and not talk about AGI and so on at this point in time. I think the biggest benefit that I see play out is very similar to what we saw in the digital wave, in the internet coming to the fore, etc. There's a bit of a time lag between the technology and its adoption. The next 12, 18 months, in my view, will be the industries, organizations, enterprises, governments trying to understand and perhaps make real what are the benefits you can get from this. And equally, figure out what are the issues that will come as a consequence of using this, and perhaps trying to figure out what are the best way you can build safeguards around them.
Yeah, so big learnings for us ahead. Tiago?
Yeah, so I believe that in the future, every company will be an AI-first company in every industry. And In my mind, at least, I believe that this is going to be even more transformative than the digital revolution, just because digital just made existing processes faster, but with AI, you can actually replace human in the loop for some of the processes. I don't believe we should replace human in the loop in every process. But I think that with that, we're going to start to see this transformation of the economy where we're going to accelerate even the physical side of things, which was always a challenge for that DX side of things. And yeah, hopefully we're going to see more innovations and more sustainability.
Awesome. So more innovations, more sustainability, and transformations across the industries. And Chandra?
I think the way AI is emerging and people are consuming, it's all co-pilots, be it enterprise or be it consumer. I think the way things will eventually evolve is we'll have personal assistants. These assistants are powered by AI. They are AI, right? They're doing things for you. Now, whatever the application be, whatever the use case be, these assistants will do things for you or help you. Now, there will be a personal assistant which will be helpful for your managing everything around you, while, of course, there'll be an enterprise version of those. And now that is to be figured out, will there be will it be the same persona? Should I carry my same personal assistant in my office work, or would that be with me doing my job at my home, right? So that, I think, ecosystem will play it out and we'll know. But I think that's where things will be. Eventually, that's the way AI should also be. I mean, it's eventually an artificial intelligence, right? That's what it is. So it should be actually an assistant helping you in whatever you need. So that's why I think things will evolve, but more push towards personal assistant. How it will evolve, TBD.
Yeah. So hyper-personalization in all the areas, like even your assistants. Okay, awesome. I'd like to thank our panel and thank you everyone for listening. Thank you.